Major funding for this program was provided by the Annenberg CPB project. Additional funding was provided by the Carnegie Corporation of New York.
For centuries, mathematicians have tried to find the perfect voting method. But for every method someone designed, someone else found...
Hang on, we've got a sound problem here. John, can you check that, please?
Oh, maybe a loose cable.
Okay, we're gonna have to fix that. Sorry, Saul. Take 5.
Okay.
That agent was supposed to call by now. I can't wait. Now that I'm a national celebrity with my own series, it should be a cinch to crack the big time. I mean, this educational stuff is okay, but I know I'm ready for prime time. All I need is the right break. Like the agent said, every serious news show needs a mathematics expert to help interpret what's really going on in the world. Limo to work, dining with the stars.
Tonight, we will witness an historic moment in American politics. The Replacement Party, a party that in recent years has become a tough contender on the national scene, is holding their nominating convention. The outcome of this election may very well determine national policy for decades to come. My name is Steve Mitchell. With me in our studio is Dr. Saul Garfunkel, a distinguished mathematician who will give us his expert political analysis during these proceedings. It's good to have you with us, Saul.
It's very nice to be here, Steve.
Saul, as you well know, the Replacement Party's convention has drawn a lot of media attention this year. Let's go live to the convention site, where our reporter Jack Webster is standing by.
I'm here at the Replacement Party National Convention, where there's a feeling of anticipation in the air. Later on today, these 55 delegates will participate in a process that has never been tried before at an American political convention. 5 candidates are vying for the nomination of this party, and all 5 will be appearing here today. But the focus of the last few months of debate has not been on candidates or issues. It's been on voting methods. In a last-ditch compromise agreement reached just a few days ago, the Replacement Party has decided to conduct 5 different ballots using 5 different voting methods, all at one time. It's unfamiliar and potentially explosive territory, but we'll be here throughout the evening to keep you up to date on just what all this means.
Saul, what's the source of all this controversy?
Well, Steve, that's the only question today which has a definite answer. The choice of voting method can significantly affect, sometimes actually determine, the outcome of an election. And when the outcome depends on the voting method, you can bet that people will be very interested in finding a method that benefits them.
With all this concern over voting methods, what happened to good old majority rule?
Well, majority rule is still a very good way to make a decision that represents the voters' wishes. In elections with only 2 candidates, the process is very simple. The candidate with the largest share of the votes wins. But when there are more than 2 candidates, as we have today, it's possible that the person with the highest tally will not have a majority of all the votes cast. In these cases, we have to come up with another way to decide who should win the election.
Throughout this broadcast, Dr. Garfunkel will be helping us understand the methods, some of which may be unfamiliar to our viewers. In the meantime, our reporter Cindy Schaefer is standing by. Cindy?
The traditional opening ceremonies for the Replacement Party have just been concluded. The presentation of the colors by the Somerville High School ROTC, the invocation by Gary Coleman, and the formal vote of approval for the Credentials Committee report. But while these standard preliminaries attempt to portray a unified front for the party, the political wheeling and dealing is barely concealed beneath the surface. Well, it seems that the crowd is getting excited about something. Yes, it's Cabot Mallory entering the convention floor. Mallory, of course, was the keynote speaker for the Replacement Party convention 4 years ago, where he set the tone for the last campaign.
My fellow replacers. I'm delighted to come before you this evening to speak to you of the founding tradition of the Replacement Party, the tradition of change. Thank you. I'm reminded as I worked my way in and saw this strong...
Standing next to me is a delegate from Butte, Montana, Mr. Fred Schultz, who is a prime mover in the Cabot-Mallory campaign. Mr. Schultz, can you tell me what his chances are?
Cindy, I think his chances are very, very good. In fact, he is very strong under the plurality method.
And one clear-eyed individual called out, "Send a replacement."
The Butte delegate mentioned the plurality method. Saul, could you explain how that method works?
The plurality method is probably the most familiar of the 5 voting methods we'll be talking about tonight. When we go to the polls to choose among more than 2 candidates in a congressional election or presidential primary, the plurality method is used. The process is simple. The candidate with the most votes wins, even if he or she does not receive a majority of the vote. Take the 1980 New York Senate race, for example. Alphonse D'Amato defeated his 2 opponents with just 45% of the vote. D'Amato was generally seen as the conservative candidate, while Elizabeth Holtzman and third-party candidate Jacob Javits appealed to liberal voters. Exit polls indicated that at least 2/3 of Javits' supporters preferred Holtzman to D'Amato. If Javits hadn't been in the race, the election would easily have gone to Holtzman. In effect, then, Holtzman and Javits split the liberal vote. And under the plurality method, the second most popular candidate was elected. For Javits voters, this election illustrates the classic third-party problem in American politics. The supporter of a third-party candidate faces a very difficult decision. Should I vote for the person I really want and risk wasting my vote, or should I vote insincerely for my second choice?
Saul, we have word from the convention that the second candidate is now at the podium.
I am proud to be running as a housewife and mother in this campaign. I believe we need to return to the real family values of sharing and cooperation.
Ruth Averman is at the podium now, and she seems to be sounding many of the same themes that have served her so well throughout this campaign. By the way, I understand that her entire family, the husband, her 5 children, and her well-known Irish setter Rover, are following the convention proceedings just outside the hall in her campaign trailer.
We need to replace our roads and bridges.
I'm here on the convention floor with the delegate from Biloxi, Mississippi.
That's Biloxi.
Oh, excuse me, Biloxi, Mississippi, Mitzi LaRue. Mitzi, how do you feel that Mrs. Averman's going to do tonight in the election?
I think she's going to do fine. She's for women's rights. She has a lot of good issues. I think she's going to do just great.
Oh.
Jack?
Excuse me?
Jack, excuse me, if I can jump in here. It's important for our purposes here that we get some additional information on the delegates. Can I ask Ms. LaRue how she ranks the candidates in this race?
Do you mind if I write this down?
Excellent idea. Here.
That's Averman, Valdez, Richardson. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's Rao.
You know, these delegates have a tough job. It's easy enough to pick your first choice, but ranking 5 candidates in order takes a lot of thinking.
May I say you have an excellent handwriting?
Why, thank you.
A list like Ms. LaRue's is called a preference schedule, and it figures prominently in the way many of these methods work. I'm going to use a humble, everyday example to illustrate the idea of preference schedules. Imagine that 11 people are going out to dinner together. You know how hard it is to decide on what to eat. They've narrowed their options down to pizza, Chinese food, or tacos. Now, each person first ranks his or her preferences individually. For example, one person might prefer Chinese food first, then tacos, and then pizza. From 11 of these individual preference schedules, a complete list of everyone's preferences can be compiled. This is the preference schedule we just saw: Chinese food, tacos, and pizza. And here's another possible list. Chinese food first again, but pizza next and tacos last. With 3 kinds of food, there are 6 possible lists in all. Now, as it happens, only 3 of these preference schedules showed up among our 11 people's lists. 5 people preferred Chinese food first, then tacos, and then pizza. 2 had the list that runs tacos, then pizza, then Chinese food, and 4 ranked pizza first, then tacos, then Chinese food. Now, if we use the plurality method to tabulate the votes, we find that Chinese food gets the most first-place votes, 5, and wins the election. But now we can see something we couldn't have known if we hadn't listed complete preference schedules. An absolute majority, 6 voters, actually ranked Chinese food last.
Saul, it looks like the plurality method has its troubles. What can be done?
Well, people are trying to get around the problems with plurality voting by adding a runoff. Instead of choosing one winner, plurality with a runoff chooses a smaller group of top candidates, which are then run against one another in subsequent elections.
How does adding a runoff help?
Adding a runoff ensures that a candidate ranked last by a majority of the voters will not be elected. But the method does have some problems. Let's say that candidates A, B, and C are running for office. There are 100 voters who fall into 4 groups. 38 prefer them in the order A, then B, then C. 30 prefer C first, then A, then B. 25 prefer B first, then C, then A. And 7 prefer B, then A, then C. The top 2 finishers in the plurality election are candidate A with 38 votes and candidate B with 32. In the runoff, using the same preference schedules and adding up the choices, A beats B by a 68 to 32 margin. But here's a problem. We start again with the same preference schedules. This time, suppose A changes her stand on a controversial issue, and the 7 voters in the last column decide to make her their first choice. B is eliminated in the first round. Then in the runoff election, candidate C beats candidate A. By getting more votes, A loses the election. How can this happen? Under a reasonable voting method, one would think that more votes would help a candidate win, not prevent him from winning. The possibility of this kind of counterintuitive result is a major flaw in the plurality with runoff scheme.
Thank you, Saul. Now we'll go live to the convention where candidate Rodney Richardson III is winding up his speech.
And so, my friends, remember, when you register your vote for running Rodney Richardson III, you reaffirm your resolve to reinstate the replacement party as #1.
I believe Cindy Schaefer is down by the podium. Let's see if she can catch Mr. Richardson. Yes, I think she's with him now. Cindy?
Rodney, can you tell me, what do you think your chances are of winning the nomination?
Sure, Cindy. If I may repeat one of my earlier responses, after reviewing the remarkable job done by my staff of recruits, I can say that we are rapidly rolling down the road to a resounding victory.
Really?
Right on.
Cindy, the crowd has taken to its feet. Running Rodney's rhetoric really rallied the replacement party.
Right. And you can see the other candidates are out there shaking hands, partly because their pollsters tell them that Richardson is looking very good under the sequential runoff method.
Well, Saul, while the delegates let loose some pent-up energy, maybe you can fill us in on that.
Sure. Plurality with runoff, which we saw a minute ago, and sequential runoff are both elimination methods. But in sequential runoff, we eliminate just one candidate at a time. Let's look at an election lineup with 4 candidates to see how sequential runoff works. This time, since D has the fewest first-place votes, we eliminate her. In the second round, C is the loser. Then A wins on the 3rd tally. But sequential elimination has the same flaw as plurality with runoff. If we change one preference schedule in A's favor and run the election again, A loses. Both of these methods risk eliminating a good alternative early on the basis of partial information, without considering the full picture. A better voting scheme would look at all preference information more uniformly. And there is a method that considers all the preference information at once, the border count. The border method will be familiar to a lot of our viewers. It's a technique the wire services use to rank the top 20 football teams every week in the fall. But to make it easy, Let's pretend that only 3 teams are being ranked: Ohio State, UCLA, and Alabama. Now say we have 100 sports writers who fall into 3 groups. With 3 teams, the Borda method assigns a first place vote 3 points, second place gets 2 points, and third place 1 point. UCLA, for example, has 52 first place votes, each worth 3 points, 38 votes at 2 points each, and 10 1-point votes, for a total of 242. The Borda count uses the entire preference rankings of all voters, and it applies this information all at once, instead of sequentially. The winner of the election, UCLA in this case, is therefore guaranteed broad-based support.
I'm sorry to cut in, Saul. We have word from the convention floor that Lyle Raup is just finishing his speech.
And I can tell you that what I saw was America. That this is America.
Well, I guess our information was a bit premature. Saul, the Borda count sounds like the method of our dreams, but I'm beginning to get skeptical. Where's its Achilles heel?
Well, the Borda count has one insurmountable flaw. It's extremely vulnerable to what's known as insincere or strategic voting. Suppose the 38 writers who most prefer Ohio State have good reason to believe that their arch rival, UCLA, will win. If all 38 of these people vote insincerely, ranking UCLA third instead of second, they can throw the victory to Ohio State. Just one preference change in a second-place ranking can manipulate the outcome of the whole election. Now, strategic voting is a fact of political life. All of the voting methods we're seeing today are vulnerable to strategic voting, each in its own way. With the increasing influence of public opinion polls, which essentially provide voters' preferences to the public in advance of the election, it becomes all the more important to understand this facet of decision-making.
Jack Webster has been talking with Lyle Raup's campaign manager, and he assures us that Raup is now concluding what can only be called an epic speech.
So when you cast your ballot to nominate your candidate from this great convention, remember America, and vote for a true American, Lyle Raup.
I believe, yes, I think Mr. Raup has ended his statement. Mr. Raup has told the convention to think and do. Yes, I believe the emphasis was on doing, and above all, to remain alive. I believe Aida Valdez has taken the stand now. Let's listen in.
Jack, it seems like the mood has really changed. Jack?
Things are getting a bit chaotic down here, Steve.
I can see that. It looks like they're chanting. What are they saying?
I don't know. I'll try to find out. Condorcet! 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 It appears they're shouting Condorcet. It's clear they feel that Valdez will win under this method.
Juntos venceremos.
¡Oh, viva, viva!
Juntos saldremos triunfantes.
Steve, let me give you a little background on this Condorcet method. It actually dates back to the 1780s, when the philosopher Condorcet was pondering the problem known as the agenda effect. We had a great example of this problem earlier this week. The 10-member platform committee met to determine the replacement party's highest priority issue. The 3 issues under consideration were defense, education, and health care. The committee members fell into 3 groups. Because health and education are both domestic social programs, a proposal was made to choose between them first, and then to take the final vote between the favorite social program and defense. When this order was adopted, education won the first round by a margin of 7-3, and when paired with defense in the final round, defense won 7-3. What if the initial vote had been between defense and education? In the first round, education, the winner last time, is eliminated. In the second round contest between defense and health, health wins 7-3. The outcome is dependent on the order in which the alternatives are considered. In fact, with certain preference schedules, any alternative can win if it comes up at the right time. Of course, politicians have known this for a long, long time.
As a general rule of thumb, the later you bring up an alternative, the better chance it has of winning. In the vernacular, it's known as stacking the agenda.
To avoid the agenda effect, Condorcet proposed a new rule, the method Valdez favors. If there's one alternative that can defeat every other in pairwise contests, a fair voting system will choose it. Let me show you the difference.
A family of 3 is trying to decide what kind of car to buy. The mother wants a Peugeot. The father wants a Jeep. And the daughter wants a Camaro.
If they didn't know about the agenda effect, the family might vote between 2 of the cars, then put the winner up against the third. But using the Condorcet method, they would pair every alternative against every other. In this case, that means 3 contests. Here are the family's preference schedules. The matchups turn out this way. Peugeot beats Camaro 2 votes to 1, and Camaro beats Jeep 2 votes to 1.
Intuition suggests that if Peugeot can beat Camaro, and if Camaro can beat Jeep, then Peugeot should beat Jeep, right?
In the contest between Peugeot and Jeep, Jeep defeats Peugeot. The Condorcet method can't be manipulated to favor an alternative that comes up later. Unfortunately, it produces no winner in this election.
Since one quality that a voting method must have is decisiveness, the Condorcet method is not one you can always count on.
We have word from the field that the moment we've been waiting for has arrived. The 55 voters have registered their preference lists. Every voter has ranked all 5 candidates. And we now have the complete summary of all the voter preferences. Saul, can we tell anything at this point?
Well, it's interesting to note that the voters' preferences fall into only 6 different orderings, although there are many other orderings possible. I'd also like to remind viewers
that the votes are now in. The complete list of all delegates' preferences that you see here won't change. All of the election methods will be computed from this one set of preference schedules.
Okay, Saul, the results of those computations are coming in now. Under the first method, plurality, the candidate with the most first-place votes wins. Cabot Mallory. Next, plurality with the runoff. In the first round, we narrow the field to Mallory and Aberman. In the runoff, the winner is Ruth Aberman. Now, sequential runoff, where one candidate is eliminated at a time. The winner, Rodney Richardson. Next, the board account. Each candidate gets 5 points for voters' first preference, 4 for second, and so on down to 1. The winner is Lyle Rauch. And last, the Condorcet method. If a candidate can defeat every other in pairwise contests, that candidate wins. It's a clean sweep. Valdez defeats everyone and is the Condorcet winner. This is unbelievable. Saul, how can this be? This is impossible. Impossible.
That's right. Impossible. That's exactly my point.
Okay, I think we're ready to do this. Positions, everybody? Sorry about that delay, Saul.
It's all right.
Okay, ready? And action.
For centuries, mathematicians have tried to find the perfect voting system. But for every method someone designed, someone else found a flaw. It was only recently, in the early 1950s,
that economist Kenneth Arrow tried a fresh approach, specifying at the outset axioms or rules that a fair voting system should be based on.
These fairness criteria are pretty straightforward notions that we'd all agree to. For instance, Arrow said if every voter prefers A to B, then a good voting method should choose A over B. Then Arrow tried to describe a voting method consistent with his modest set of axioms.
After having formulated 3 or 4 conditions of this kind, I kept on experimenting. And lo and behold, no matter what I did, there was nothing that would satisfy these axioms. So after a few days of this, I began to get the idea that maybe there was another kind of theorem here, namely that there was no voting method which would satisfy all the conditions that I regarded as rational, as reasonable. It was that point I set out to prove that.
Arrow demonstrated that no voting method can satisfy the fairness criteria. This result stunned political scientists, economists, and philosophers, and Arrow received the 1972 Nobel Prize in Economics partly for this work.
It should be made clear that my impossibility theorem is really a theorem that the impossibilities are possible, not that they're necessary. What I claim is that given any voting procedure, there will be some possible set of preference orders individuals which will lead to a contradiction of one of those axioms. But you say, well, okay, since we can't get perfection, let's at least try to find a method which doesn't, works well most of the time, and when you do have a problem, well, you don't notice it so much, things like that. So it's not, in that sense, a completely destructive and negative feature any more than, let's say, the second law of thermodynamics means that people don't work on improving the efficiency of engines. We're told you'll never get a 100% efficient engine. That's a fact, and it's a law. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't like to go from 40% to 50%. And it's in the same vein that one way of developing research is to assume that okay, you'll just have a system which will occasionally break down, but occasionally lead to some violation of one of my axioms. But all right, let's just try to do it in a way which doesn't happen too often.
So it's almost certain that we haven't heard the last word about voting. Group decision-making is so important that we'll always keep searching for better and better voting methods. And for the same reason, mathematicians will keep scrutinizing new methods, looking for the flaws they know will be there. Because, as we've seen, the voting method we use can determine the decision we make.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Annenberg CPB project. Additional funding was provided by the Carnegie Corporation.